Welcome to another deep dive, everyone.
Excited to be here.
Today, we're going down a pretty dark road. Richard Ramirez.
The Night Stalker.
Yeah, the Night Stalker terrorized California back in the 80s.
Absolutely.
So we've got some excerpts here from his Wikipedia page. Gives us a decent overview.
Good place to start.
Yeah, and our mission, I guess, today is to sort of go beyond the headlines, right? Beyond just the basic facts and see if we can figure out what made this guy tick.
Right. I mean, his case, it's really fascinating because it goes beyond, I think, a typical serial killer profile. The crimes themselves, it wasn't just about the killings, but the terror, right? Just the sheer randomness, the brutality of it all.
Yeah, yeah. So to really get into that, let's go back to the beginning. Born in El Paso, Texas, youngest of five.
Right.
Not exactly a happy childhood by all accounts.
No, not at all. Alcoholic and abusive father. And I mean, severely abusive. We're not just talking, yelling or the occasional. I mean, think about this. Ramirez, as a kid, tied to a crucifix in a cemetery overnight by his father
Oh my God.
as punishment.
That's horrific. Just awful to even imagine.
Yeah, that kind of abuse, it really can impact a child's development.
For sure. And then on top of that, he was using drugs from a middle young age, like 10 years old, marijuana, alcohol, LSD by 14.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's this other piece of the puzzle here. His cousin, Miguel Mike Valles, Vietnam's vet, probably almost certainly suffering from schizophrenia and PTSD.
Right.
And this guy, Mike, he'd brag about, horrific things he did in the war, show Ramirez graphic photos. And instead of being repulsed, like a normal person might be, Ramirez was fascinated.
Wow. So almost like he was desensitized to violence at a very young age.
Exactly. And it wasn't just stories. Mike taught Ramirez combat tactics, stealth, skills that would later show up in his crimes.
Right.
And it gets worse. When Ramirez was 15, Mike murders his wife right in front of him.
Oh God.
And again, Ramirez isn't traumatized. He's fascinated.
That's just, I mean, that really suggests something was really off in terms of his emotional responses.
Yeah, absolutely. And around this time, he also starts getting into Satanism, the occult. So you've got this mix of influences, right? Already seemingly numb to violence. The occult maybe provides a framework, to make sense of it all. Could maybe even justify it.
Right, right. So we've got this deeply troubled childhood, exposure to extreme violence, this fascination with the death, the occult. How does all this lead to him becoming the Night Stalker?
Well, things just spiral. He drops out of school, spends some time living with his brother-in-law, who was a peeping Tom, ends up in California, age 22, cocaine addiction, fuels a lot of criminal activity, starts with theft, burglary, escalates to sexual assault.
And then murder.
Yeah, April 1984, his first known murder. 9-year-old Mei Leung in San Francisco. And what's chilling is this crime wasn't linked to Ramirez until 2009. DNA evidence.
So 25 years.
25 years.
To make that connection makes you wonder how many other cases go unsolved. And I understand there might be another suspect in that case as well.
There is. Another DNA sample from the scene suggests a second suspect, possibly a juvenile at the time. But no charges have been filed. Lack of evidence.
Wow. So we have this horrific first murder, and then his reign of terror really begins in 85 in the LA area.
Yeah. He starts this series of brutal home invasions, murders, rapes, assaults, burglaries. What strikes you about this period of his crimes?
I think just the utter randomness of it, his victims, different ages, races, genders. He used whatever he could find as a weapon. Handguns, a machete, a tire iron, even a lamp.
Right. That unpredictable nature made him so difficult to track.
But one case that really stands out, I think, in terms of the brutality is the Zazara murders.
Absolutely. This case, it really shows the escalating violence. Not only did he kill Vincent and Maxine Zazara, but he mutilated Maxine's body after death. Took her eyes as a souvenir.
God, horrific. And it was around this time the media dubbed him the Night Stalker, right?
Exactly. And that played right into, his desire for notoriety.
Oh, for sure. And then he starts incorporating like satanic rituals into his crimes, drawing pentagrams, forcing victims to swear allegiance to Satan. Do you think this was a genuine belief system for him, or was it more about power, control?
It's hard to say definitively. It could have been genuine, or a way to instill fear, exert control, a twisted form of self-aggrandizement. Probably a combination of all of those things.
Yeah, makes you wonder what was going on in his head. But at some point, there's a turning point in the investigation, right?
Yes, and it comes in the form of a footprint. At the scene of the Pan murders, he leaves a print from his Avia sneakers.
Huh.
Police trace these rare shoes. Find out only 6 pairs of that size existed in California. It was a real break in the case.
That's like something out of a crime novel.
Except this was all too real. And then something happens that almost derails the whole investigation. San Francisco Mayor Dianne Feinstein, in a press conference, leaks information about the shoes and the murder weapon.
Oh, wow.
The detectives were furious. They knew Ramirez was glued to the news coverage.
So that basically tipped him off.
Exactly. Ramirez realizes he's been identified, throws his shoes off the Golden Gate Bridge. Major setback.
So close, yet so far. So what happens next?
Well, he had a very close call.
So last we left off, Ramirez, he knew the police were onto him. Just barely evaded capture. What happened next?
Well, he was spotted by a 13-year-old boy, actually, James Romero III, gave the police a detailed description of Ramirez, his vehicle. So the net was tightening. Ramirez goes back to Los Angeles and, I guess in a moment of panic, he sees his face plastered on the front page of La Opinión, the Spanish-language newspaper.
Oh, wow. Talk about a deer in the headlights moment.
Right. I bet the reality of the situation really hit home. Seeing his own face like that.
Yeah.
So he runs out of a convenience store, dashes across the Santa Ana freeway at one point, tries to carjack a Ford Mustang.
Oh, jeez.
But the owner fights back, pulls him out of the car. Then he goes for another car, tries to grab the keys from a woman, Angelina de la Torre.
And that's where things get... Well, you couldn't script this.
No, you couldn't. Angelina's husband, Manuel de la Torre, sees what's happening, whacks Ramirez over the head with a fence post.
Whoa.
And that's the triggers for a full-blown citizen's arrest, East L.A. style.
Wait, so like a whole group of people jumped in?
Oh yeah, at least 10 people chased him down the street, including the sons of the man whose Mustang he tried to carjack earlier. They caught him and, well, let's just say they didn't take it easy on him.
Yeah, I've seen the pictures. I mean, he was badly beaten.
He was. It was a pretty brutal scene. The police responded to reports of a disturbance. And when they arrive, they find Ramirez barely recognizable. It's a crazy story, right? He goes from narrowly escaping to front page news to a full-on street brawl, all in a few days.
It really is wild. So at that point, the police had their suspect, but they still needed to build a case, gather evidence, take him to trial. What was that process like?
The trial began in July 1988, and from the start, Ramirez made it clear he was going to cause as much disruption as possible. One of his first court appearances, he holds up his hand with a pentagram drawn on it and shouts, "Hail Satan!" I mean, the guy really knew how to play up to the media, create a spectacle.
He seemed to relish the attention, the fear he instilled. But there were some serious security concerns throughout the trial as well, right?
Absolutely. Reports that he was plotting to shoot the prosecutor, may have even tried to smuggle a gun into the courtroom. Authorities were on high alert. Metal detectors, intensive searches. Must have been a very tense environment.
And then, on top of everything else, the trial was suddenly interrupted by the murder of one of the jurors, Phyllis Singletary.
Yeah, that was a shocking development. Can you imagine? Being one of the other jurors, I mean, their lives were already turned upside down by this case. And then this very real fear that Ramirez may have somehow orchestrated a murder from his jail cell.
It really highlights the grip this case had on the city, the level of fear. But in the end, it turned out that her boyfriend was the one who killed her, and he later took his own life.
Right. Tragic situation. Brought a temporary halt to the trial. Eventually, the trial resumed. But the delays, the intense security measures, all of that drove up the cost.
So how much did it end up costing?
$1.8 million. Most expensive murder trial in California history at the time. That record was later broken by the O.J. Simpson trial. But still, it really speaks to the scale, the complexity of the Ramirez case.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. But, I mean, given the charges, the high-profile nature of it all, not that surprising. But back to the trial itself, after all the delays, the disruptions, what happened?
Finally, in September 1989, Ramirez is convicted on all 43 charges, 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, 14 burglaries. The judge sentenced him to death 19 times, said his actions showed cruelty, callousness, and viciousness beyond any human understanding.
Wow, those are some powerful words. Did he ever show any remorse? for the horrific things he did?
No, not at all. In fact, after hearing the death sentences, he famously told reporters, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." I mean, the man seemed completely devoid of empathy, regret.
That's chilling. Absolute chilling. So convicted, sentenced to death. What happens next?
Sent to San Quentin's death row to await execution. But believe it or not, that's not where his story ends. He achieved this strange, morbid celebrity status, received fan mail, even married a woman, Doreen Lenoy. She'd been writing him letters.
He got married on death row. I find that so bizarre. I mean, this is a man who terrorized a city, left a trail of victims. Why would anyone be drawn to someone like that?
I think it speaks to this dark fascination that some people have with notorious criminals, serial killers especially. In Ramirez's case, maybe it was his charisma, his embrace of the satanic, his lack of remorse. Some people are just drawn to the darkness.
It's a strange phenomenon, but ultimately, despite the notoriety, he was still a convicted murderer. On death row, what was the final chapter?
He spent over 2 decades on death row. Appeals were unsuccessful. But he never faced execution. 2013, age 53. Ramirez dies. Complications from B-cell lymphoma.
So, no dramatic execution, no final statement, just a quiet end in a prison hospital. Seems almost anticlimactic for someone who caused so much terror.
It does, doesn't it? It's interesting to note his body was unclaimed, cremated, almost like he wanted to, vanish without a trace, like he used to slip into those homes at night.
It's a strange and unsettling end to a truly horrific chapter in California history. So, having taken this deep dive into the life and crimes of Richard Ramirez, what are some of the takeaways here? What makes this case stand out from other serial killer stories?
For me, it's the sheer randomness of it all.
It really is the randomness that gets to me. He didn't have a type, a method. Makes it that much more terrifying because it feels like anyone could have been a target.
Exactly. Shattered that sense of security, that people have in their own homes. And it made everyday objects feel like potential weapons because you just never knew what he might use.
And we have to talk about the satanic element too. It added this whole other layer of fear. It wasn't just about killing it. It felt like he was invoking something dark, evil.
Definitely. The imagery, forcing victims to swear to Satan, it all played into this perception of him as almost a demonic figure tapped into people's deepest fears.
And we can't forget that chaotic capture, right? I mean, it wasn't brilliant police work that brought him down. It was a 13-year-old kid, a leaked shoe print, an angry mob.
Right. It's almost anticlimactic for someone who became so notorious. But maybe it's fitting in a way. His crimes were so random, motives so unclear. Maybe it makes sense that his capture was this bizarre, almost haphazard event.
It's definitely a story you couldn't make up.
And it's a story that continues to fascinate people. I mean, look at how many books, documentaries, TV shows have been inspired by this case. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, he still has this hold on our collective imagination.
I think it's that morbid curiosity. People want to understand what could drive a person to commit such horrific acts.
We want to make sense of the senseless. But in the case of Richard Ramirez, I'm not sure there are any easy answers. He remains an enigma, even after all these years.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider. Despite all the evidence, Richard Ramirez never formally confessed. So, do you think it's possible there are more victims out there, crimes that were never linked to him? And maybe even more intriguing, how do you think that leak by Mayor Feinstein affected the investigation? Did it prolong his reign of terror, or was his capture inevitable anyway?
Those are definitely questions worth pondering. I don't think we'll ever truly know the full extent of his crimes, but his legacy, this legacy of fear and enduring fascination, it continues to haunt us.
Well, there you have it, our deep dive into the life and crimes of Richard Ramirez. The Night Stalker, a chilling and disturbing story for sure. Until next time, stay curious, and maybe double check those locks tonight.